Princess Leonor's Crown vs. Love. At dawn, the stone corridors of Spain's royal institutions hold their breath. Light moves slowly across marble floors polished by centuries of continuity. Uniforms wait. Documents wait. History waits. She walks into this silence not as a private individual, but as a living instrument of the state. Every step measured, every appearance calibrated, because from the moment she was born, the future of a nation began to take shape around her. For Princess Leonor of Spain, the crown is not an aspiration. It is architecture, a structure of law, ritual, and expectation that predates emotion and outlives affection. Spain does not see a young woman. Spain sees continuity. This is the living thread of monarchy in a constitutional age, fragile, symbolic, and relentlessly observed. National identity is woven into these rituals. The oath, the uniform, the controlled silence at official ceremonies where no gesture is accidental. To the outside world, this appears serene, stable, predictable, but that assumption is the first illusion. Because the modern crown is no longer protected by distance. It is tested in real time, by media saturation, by democratic scrutiny, by a global audience fluent in collapse. And so the question emerges quietly, almost dangerously. Not spoken in parliament, not written into law, but present nonetheless. Is the future of the institution strengthened by emotional authenticity? Or endangered by it? At first, the narrative is simple. A young heir is trained, educated in constitutional law, military command, and diplomatic restraint. Prepared to represent a Spain that must feel both ancient and modern, ceremonial and accountable. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence. A presence interpreted instantly in Washington, where stability in allied monarchies still signals predictability. In London, where the monarchy understands better than anyone that affection can never outrank duty. In Ottawa and Canberra, where crowns exist largely as symbols, and symbols, when shaken, fall faster than governments. In Berlin, where institutional seriousness is measured not by tradition, but by discipline. The world is watching, even when it pretends not to. And then comes the first fracture in certainty. Because the crown does not only demand obedience. It demands sacrifice, quietly, without apology. Private life narrows. Choice becomes conditional. Even silence becomes performative. What appears as personal freedom is, in reality, managed restraint. And here, the audience often misunderstands. They assume the conflict is emotional, romantic, human, but that is not where the real tension lives. The true strain is structural. This is not a question about love. It is a question about precedent. Every monarch before her learned this lesson late. Some through scandal, some through abdication, some through carefully arranged compliance that preserved the institution while erasing the individual. The institution survives not because it adapts emotionally, but because it controls symbols with precision. At minute 5 of her life as a future sovereign, this reality becomes unavoidable. The crown does not ask what she wants. It asks what must be preserved. And still, something remains unspoken. Because the most powerful constraints are never announced. They are understood. What conversations happen behind closed doors? What boundaries are explained not as rules, but as inevitabilities? There are no official statements about what she must give up. That absence is deliberate. Silence protects the system. At minute 8 of this story, that silence becomes the mystery itself. Not scandal, not rebellion, but the quiet tension between what is possible and what is permitted. Spain's monarchy exists because it learned, painfully, that visibility can destroy legitimacy. So discretion becomes governance. By the midpoint, the pressure is no longer hypothetical. The institution begins to sense the future testing its limits. Not through protest, but through expectation. A public that wants authenticity. A global media environment that rewards intimacy. A generation raised to believe fulfillment is a right, not a privilege. Here, the strain appears. Because monarchy survives by denying one truth modern culture insists upon. That personal happiness is supreme. This is the point of no return. Once the public begins to imagine alternatives, containment becomes harder. Once choice is perceived as possible, restraint looks imposed. And yet, the system cannot bend too far. Because symbols, once humanized excessively, lose authority. At minute 14, the cliffhanger sharpens. Not a decision made, but a decision approaching. Spain understands what is at stake. So does the United States, where constitutional symbolism still matters in foreign perception. So does the United Kingdom, where one personal choice reshaped the monarchy for a generation. So does Germany, quietly attentive to whether institutions can still command respect without force. This is not about romance. It is about endurance. By minute 19, the future threat is clear, though safely unnamed. A moment will come when alignment between individual desire and institutional necessity will be tested. When that moment arrives, the response must appear effortless. Anything less signals weakness. And weakness, in monarchy, is contagious. The crown cannot afford hesitation. But neither can it afford detachment. That is the paradox she inherits. In the final moments, the corridor remains. The rituals continue. The silence holds. She moves forward, trained, composed, aware. Yet the edge of history is close enough to feel. Because the crown is inherited. But the legacy is chosen, and what comes next has not yet decided which side of history it will belong to. Mourning does not soften the institution. It clarifies it. The schedules resume with mechanical precision. Briefings, protocols, security corridors that curve away from curiosity. Nothing here is designed for spontaneity. For Princess Leonor of Spain, preparation is not a phase. It is a condition of existence. Every public appearance is less about visibility than reassurance. The reassurance that the system holds. That the line remains unbroken. That Spain, as an idea, continues without interruption. This is how monarchy survives in a constitutional age, not by ruling, but by enduring. By absorbing attention without revealing strain. By becoming familiar enough to comfort, yet distant enough to command respect. From the outside, the discipline appears almost excessive. But discipline is the price of symbolic power. Because symbols cannot afford contradiction. Education is framed not as personal development, but as institutional reinforcement. Law before literature. History before opinion. Command before expression. She is taught not what to think, but how not to reveal it. This is the architecture of restraint. And restraint, here, is not suppression. It is governance. Across the Atlantic, observers understand this language instinctively. In Washington, stability is read not in emotion, but in predictability. An heir who behaves as expected is an ally to order. An heir who surprises is a variable. In London, this logic is almost reflexive. There, the crown learned long ago that affection can be won, but authority must be protected. Personal authenticity is permitted only after institutional safety is guaranteed. Canada and Australia read the situation differently. Distance has made their relationship with monarchy symbolic, almost theoretical. But that distance also means fragility. If the symbol wavers, relevance dissolves quickly. Germany watches with a colder lens. Institutions there are respected only when they demonstrate internal discipline. Emotion, when it enters public leadership, is treated as risk. None of these perspectives are announced. They are understood. This is the deeper reality. The crown does not exist solely for Spain. It exists within a global ecosystem of legitimacy. And that ecosystem has little tolerance for ambiguity. The second illusion now reveals itself. Many assume that modern monarchy has softened. That it has learned to compromise with personal freedom. That tradition has loosened its grip. But in truth, the opposite has occurred. As formal power has diminished, symbolic responsibility has intensified. When a monarch no longer governs, presence becomes governance. Behavior becomes policy. Silence becomes signal. There is no margin for error in that equation. This is where personal life becomes institutional terrain. Not because the institution is cruel, but because it is fragile. Every relationship, every attachment, is evaluated not for affection, but for alignment. Does it reinforce continuity? Does it invite scrutiny? Does it introduce narrative risk? The crown does not fear love. It fears unpredictability. And unpredictability, once visible, cannot be contained. This is why so much is left unsaid. Why absence of information is treated as stability. Why discretion is praised as maturity. Because the most dangerous thing for a symbolic institution is explanation. To explain is to humanize. To humanize is to invite judgment. And judgment erodes reverence. The system has learned this lesson through history, not theory. And so the pressure does not arrive loudly. It arrives through expectation. Through narrowed choices presented as inevitabilities. Through futures quietly removed from consideration. By the end of this chapter, nothing dramatic has happened. No declarations. No defiance. And that is precisely the point. Power, at this level, is not exercised in moments of rebellion. It is exercised in moments of acceptance. The crown advances not through force, but through consent. First internal, then public. And the most important consent is never televised. It is the moment when the individual understands. that the institution will always come first, and chooses not to resist. For now, the system remains intact, smooth, convincing, but beneath that surface, the equation tightens. Because the more perfectly the role is performed, the more costly deviation becomes. And history has shown, repeatedly, that when the price of deviation rises too high, the reckoning, when it comes, is never gentle. The third pressure does not come from within Spain. It arrives from reflection, from screens and headlines abroad that quietly recalibrate expectations, from societies that believe transparency is strength, and intimacy is credibility. The institution notices this shift immediately. For Princess Leonor of Spain, visibility is no longer ceremonial alone. It is interpretive. Every gesture is decoded, every pause assigned meaning. This is where the crown encounters its most modern challenge. Not opposition, but familiarity. When leaders become relatable, they are embraced. When symbols become relatable, they are questioned. The line between those two outcomes is thin and unforgiving. Spain's monarchy exists because it learned to survive visibility without surrendering mystery. That balance is now harder to maintain than at any point in living memory. Across the United States, the conversation is subtle but persistent. Can an institution rooted in inheritance remain credible in a culture built on choice? Stability is valued, but only when it appears earned. In the United Kingdom, memory sharpens the analysis. There, the cost of personal divergence is not theoretical. It is archived, studied, quietly warned against. Canada and Australia absorb these developments with conditional patience. Their connection to the crown is symbolic, yes. But symbols require maintenance. Once relevance is doubted, disengagement follows without drama. Germany observes with reserved interest. Institutions there are respected when they demonstrate internal coherence. Not warmth, not accessibility, coherence. This global gaze does not pressure the crown to change. It pressures it to clarify what it is. And clarity, in this case, is dangerous. Because clarity demands answers to questions the institution survives by postponing. How much individuality is permissible? At what point does authenticity undermine authority? Who decides where that line exists? These questions are never asked publicly, but they shape every private calculation. The training intensifies, not visibly, but strategically. Greater emphasis on composure, on controlled spontaneity, on mastering the appearance of ease without surrendering control. This is not performance, it is defensive architecture. The crown has learned that modern crises rarely announce themselves. They accumulate, silently, until one moment exposes what has been building for years. And so, what looks like calm is often containment. The public sees confidence. The institution sees calibration. This is the deeper truth rarely acknowledged. Modern monarchy does not fear scandal. It fears narrative drift, because once the story escapes institutional framing, authority becomes reactive, and reaction is weakness. There are moments now, fleeting, unrecorded, where the weight of expectation becomes perceptible. Not as rebellion, not as doubt, but as awareness. Awareness that the role will never loosen. That accommodation will always stop short of freedom. That the institution offers meaning, but not choice. This awareness does not destabilize the crown. It sharpens it, yet sharp structures cut deeply when bent. For now, the balance holds. The image remains intact. The system continues to project inevitability. But inevitability is persuasive only until it is questioned. And once the question exists, even silently, the institution must begin preparing not just for continuity, but for consequence. The future has not demanded an answer yet, but it is no longer waiting quietly. The fourth pressure arrives without warning. Not through protest, not through crisis, through time, because institutions built on inheritance depend on patience. And time erodes patience faster than opposition ever could. For Princess Leonor of Spain, the passage of years is not neutral. Each year sharpens scrutiny. Each year narrows tolerance for ambiguity. What once felt like preparation now feels like postponement. And postponement, in the modern age, invites interpretation. The institution senses this shift immediately. Spain understands that continuity cannot appear indefinite. A future sovereign must feel inevitable, but also imminent. That balance is delicate. Move too quickly, and authority appears forced. Move too slowly, and relevance fades. This is where institutional strain becomes visible, not publicly, but internally. Calendars tighten, appearances multiply, symbolic responsibilities expand with deliberate pacing. Not to grant freedom, but to demonstrate readiness. Because readiness reassures markets, allies, and governments alike. In Washington, predictability remains the metric. A stable succession is read as political maturity. Delay invites speculation. In London, experience has taught that transitions must feel organic, even when they are meticulously engineered. Anything abrupt unsettles the narrative. Canada and Australia measure relevance in public sentiment. If the symbol does not evolve visibly, it risks being perceived as ornamental. Germany evaluates coherence, not popularity, not charisma, coherence. All of these judgments converge silently on the same expectation: that the institution knows where it is going. And here, the tension tightens. Because the crown cannot reveal its destination without revealing its constraints. Private life, once shielded by youth, now becomes subject to projection. Assumptions fill gaps left by discretion. Speculation grows precisely because certainty is withheld. The institution does not respond. It never does. Response implies vulnerability. Instead, it doubles down on formality, on symbolism, on controlled presence. This is not retreat. It is reinforcement. Yet reinforcement has a cost. The more rigid the structure becomes, the less room remains for adjustment. And history has shown that when monarchies reach this phase, the next test is never theoretical. It is personal, not because the individual seeks confrontation, but because life does not pause for institutions. This is the unspoken risk the system calculates constantly. Not rebellion, not refusal, but inevitability colliding with constraint. For now, the collision has not occurred. The image holds. The silence remains intact, but the margin is thinner than it was. Because time does not negotiate. It advances, and as it does, the question grows sharper. Not whether the crown will endure, but what it will require to do so. The institution is still in control. But control, at this stage, is no longer absolute. It is conditional. The corridors remain unchanged. That is their power. Stone outlasts emotion. Ritual outlasts intention. Institutions endure by appearing unmoved by the people who carry them forward. For Princess Leonor of Spain, this is the final truth of inheritance. The crown does not ask for certainty. It demands readiness for consequence. Everything before this moment has been calibration. Training mistaken for youth. Silence mistaken for simplicity. Patience mistaken for freedom. But now the shape of the future is visible, not in decision, but in narrowing space. Spain does not require perfection. It requires continuity that feels inevitable. A presence that reassures without explaining. A sovereign who embodies stability without inviting inspection. This is how the institution survives. Across the Atlantic, allies read the signals carefully. In the United States, steadiness remains the currency of trust. In the United Kingdom, memory serves as warning, not nostalgia. Canada and Australia watch relevance like a fault line. Germany watches coherence, unmoved by sentiment. None of these observers ask for declarations. They ask for control. And control, at this level, is measured by what is not done. What is not said. What is quietly set aside. The crown is inherited. That part is fixed. What is not fixed is the cost of carrying it forward. There will come a moment, unseen, unannounced, when alignment is tested, not between desire and duty, but between the individual and the institution that must outlive her. When that moment arrives, there will be no ceremony, no vote, no public reckoning, only continuation, or fracture. The question lingers not because it seeks an answer, but because the answer, once given, cannot be taken back. The institution stands ready, history always is, and somewhere between silence and inevitability, the future waits, undecided.